866-957-2874. Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
The best place for news and information. We save the best for last here at SiriusXM. It's 9 p.m. to midnight, 5 nights a week, and we are in your ears. We're on your radios. We're on your phones. We are with you here at SiriusXM. Thank you for being a part of it. Welcoming into the show, Jill Jacobson, visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum Law Center, contributor at Young Voices at Jill C. Jacobson on X. Hey, Jill. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Stacy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my goodness. Your analysis is needed because we have all been rejoicing. A shout of joy emanated from the land when we heard that the Supreme Court overturned the Chevron deference, and we're waiting for the other dominoes to fall. Tell us what to expect.
As was I, Stacey, as was I. I think, a lot of people are sounding the alarms that this is the end to regulation, this is the end to administrative state, and that's not entirely true, but it certainly is the end to what I call lazy government, which means it is the end to federal agencies taking advantage of vague statutes. Now, when regulators want to regulate, they have to do it in a reasonable, exacting way, and then most importantly, in a way that the courts will approve of.
Yeah, I think the thing that everybody's looking at is just how upset everyone on the left is, right? So I was kind of like, okay, they struck down the Chevron deference and said it was consequential and, 40 years of Chevron deference, and now that's all been wiped away. They made a big note about the Supreme Court being a right-wing organization, an arm of the Republicans. The Heritage Foundation has, caused this horrible thing. And I've heard all that before. But once you cut through all the noise, the people on the left are complaining because unelected bureaucrats will no longer be able to literally reach into your kitchen or your bathroom or in some cases your business and tell you exactly how it should be run with you not having any recourse by, electing or unelecting a congressional member.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. In the pre-Chevron world, the courts actually decided matters of law as they should and as our Constitution vests them with the power to do. And then Chevron came along and put the thumb on the scale in favor of the agencies. In other words, regulated parties, whether that be individuals like you and me or small businesses, would go into courts trying to fight against agency action, and the court was required to defer to the agency, to automatically side with them essentially, unless what their interpretation was doing was unreasonable. And now that's been overturned, and now courts can actually do what the Constitution vests them to do, which is to interpret the law.
And the interpretation of the law, I feel like that, I as a lay person would much prefer that to be done by judges and attorneys and people who spent years of their lives learning all about that, rather than bureaucrats who may or may not have PhDs or may have other areas of expertise. But at the end of the day, they don't seem to have an understanding, at least for the past 40 years, they haven't demonstrated an understanding of how their actions actually impact Americans.
Yeah, the common retort on the left right now is, now agencies' expertise won't be heard. Well, what about agencies' expertise? And that's not entirely accurate, because now that Chevron's been overturned, courts will rely on agency expertise in the way that they rely on any litigant. They'll listen to them, they will respect them, but they aren't bound by law to defer to them completely.
Yeah, and bound by the law. So, now we kind of wade into those murky waters. The laws themselves are passed, they obviously go back and forth between the two houses of Congress. And then once they can come up with something they agree on, which means it has to be pretty vague because nobody wants to be pinned down on anything, they then get the president, who usually it's two of the same parties the same party in Congress, the Republicans or all Democrats, the Democrat president, they sign it into law. And then they leave all of the murky details, the toothy details, the things that really matter. They leave those up to agencies to decide. And the agencies seem to be manned exclusively by left-wingers, by people who are, care more about the environment than they do babies or the American way. It's an unbelievable juxtaposition when you look at what Congress passes and then how they actually exact the rules around the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act or any of this stuff.
Well, you point out a really sort of insidious dynamic that's going on in our current congressional environment, which is that Congress purposefully legislates in vague ways so that the administrative state can pick up the slack. I mean, to put it charitably, you could say that this is what they envision as a functional large federal bureaucracy, but to put it more realistically, it's that they're dysfunctional and they're both incapable and unwilling to legislate in the required manner to manage a complex federal government. And instead, they would rather delegate to unelected bureaucrats such that they can keep being reelected and aren't accountable to people like you and I.
Oh yeah, and there it is, right there. You just totally that's the part that we're so sick of. You don't know who to elect or unelect because you can't trace the horrible legislation that makes our dishwashers so ineffective back to any congressional, back to any year, right? You can't say that was the 114th Congress that passed that bill or the 89th Congress. You can't say that was my Missouri congressional district. I'm in Mo 2. That would be Ann Wagner. I can't say that because the bill is passed in some kind of an omnibus or in a grouping of things. We are going about our business expecting, hoping for something good to happen. And then we go to buy a dishwasher. Not only is a dishwasher no longer $500. I just remember for years and years and years, if you had $500 to spend, you could buy a really nice dishwasher. Now you need $950 for a basic dishwasher. And if you upgrade and spend $1,500, it still doesn't mean that it's going to actually clean the dishes. It just means that it has a panel on the front that looks like your cabinets or like the hood of a car or something like that, right? And that's just dishwashers. The complaints I have about washing machines aren't fit for this segment because I need a whole hour to go into all the different things. I mean, and I have a few. I have 2 washers. I have 2 dryers. And they're not the same. One's a stackable, and it's a Samsung, and the ones upstairs are Whirlpool. I've already had to replace the Whirlpool. It didn't even last me 10 years. So the washer is a second version. I bought an older one because, in washing machines, here's a trick. Here's a secret I've learned. The older the machine you buy, the longer it will last. And even the technicians will tell you. The technician who came to fix ours, he said, I can fix it for you, but it'll be $800, and you can buy a whole new washer for that. And he said, when you do, buy the washer you need. Leave off the extra bells and whistles because every additional bell and whistle on a new washer is something else that costs more than the whole machine to fix if it should ever go out, and they will go out. And I was looking at him thinking, well, you should be doing the commercial, not that cute lady in her, $8 million kitchen selling me that washing machine. You should do the commercial, you, Mr. Fix-It guy. So, I don't have anybody to blame for the way that these things don't work anymore.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have lost sort of the true aspect of representative government now that the true lawmaking is done by unelected bureaucrats that largely stay between administration to administration. When people talk about the deep state, you can get conspiratorial, but what they really mean is this group of unelected bureaucrats that do 99% of our governance that stay there irrespective of who's in the White House.
So irrespective of who's in the White House, absolutely a thing that needs to be taken over. And I love what you say when you talk about this, Jill. You talk about the fact that, so when Democrats are in office, we have a rash of things that make our lives less high society, less high carbon, less fun, right? And then when the Republicans are in, they're trying, like the Trump administration was. They promised to slash 2 regulations for every one that they implemented. They were up to almost 4 regulations slashed for every single one that they implemented by the end. And so Biden came in, and I guess he was like, well, they turbocharged the deregulation, so we got to turbocharge the re-regulation. So he's been adding them back in as fast as he can. And I think there should be something like at our house, when I drive my husband's car, I don't go and do everything the opposite of the way he would do it, just because it's not my car. Or, if I'm borrowing something from someone, I don't use it in the opposite way just because I'm not that person. But in government, that's what we do. If the Democrats are running government, they run it in Oppositeville. If Republicans are running it, they run it in, Forwardville. So we should have something that's the same no matter what. And I think that's the part that's really gumming up the works here, which is why people should wake up and stop voting for the Democrats. I mean, I'm sorry to have to say it, but they're the ones who are kind of gumming things up, but they're able to do it because of the bureaucracy.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, this is something that will likely change under Chevron, at least when it comes to federal administrations, because one of the core problems with Chevron was that it enabled this flip-flopping, right? The Democrats could come in and interpret a statute one way, and then the Republicans could come in and interpret it another way, and so long as it was reasonable, the courts would uphold it. Now that that's gone, the law means what the law means. And once the courts interpret it, that interpretation is binding, irrespective of which party the bureaucrat happens to be a part of. So the fall of Chevron really should introduce some stability into our regulation. And instead of just interpreting the same words differently that particular day, Congress will actually have to go back to the drawing board, work together and rewrite a statute if it wishes to change things, instead of allowing the executive to just say that they interpret the same words differently.
Yeah. So that was the Democrats and Republicans of the 1900s, where it was pretty much the same ideas, the same landing place. It was, how do we get there? Now it's, one party is going in the direction of Marxism, progressing to communism, and the other party is hanging on for dear life, ripping their fingernails off, and basically just slowing down the progression, right? It's not that we're moving the country towards conservatism. We're just slowing down what is the inevitable, leap off of the cliff. This ruling, I'm almost afraid of what the backlash of the Democrats will be. I'm wondering what can they do? Is there anything you can think of that they could actually do that would, kind of ignore or undo the elimination of the Chevron deference?
Well, Stacey, I'll tell you something both ironic and funny, which is that the Democrats actually hated Chevron when it was first created in the 1980s. So the big proponent of Chevron was Ann Gorsuch, then head of the EPA, who is the mother of now Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch.
What?
And she, yes, under the Reagan administration, they were heading the EPA trying to deregulate environmental regulation. And obviously Chevron puts the thumb on the scale towards agencies. So conservatives loved it because it made repealing these environmental regulations and deregulating the economy that much easier. And Democrats said this is the end to the environment, this is the end to federal government. And now that liberals are in the White House and they need Chevron, now all of a sudden they're devastated at its demise. So this is really a tool of statutory interpretation. It favors whoever's in the executive, whether they're Republicans or Democrats.
Yeah. That's a part of the story that deserves a Netflix or
that doesn't
some kind
get
of
much
movie.
media attention now that
Right?
they're upset with the ruling.
Yeah. Although that whole breakdown you just did there is a pitch or blurb for a made-for-TV movie or 3-part miniseries on the politics
Freud is
behind
laughing
it.
somewhere.
Yes, and the people, because when you talk about this woman, right, we wouldn't have really recognized her name as being that consequential, except now her son sits on the United States Supreme Court. Now that's juicy. Like, you have to wonder how that came about. Not that we don't understand that he was an attorney and progressed up, and his career progression was one that led him to have the opportunity to be on the Supreme Court, but that his mom actually was instrumental in a case that he ended up reversing.
Yep.
Fascinating. So what's next? What should we do? Should we be calling our legislators and saying, here's a few of the things we want rolled back, or hope for the best when the Trump administration comes in, as we're all hoping and praying will happen?
I think this will be a true test for Congress to step up to the plate, because the reality is there will be a power vacuum, one that, traditionally Congress filled. Agencies are doing much of the work of Congress right now, and now that this ruling makes that arguably more difficult, let's see, will Congress rise to the occasion? I'm not hopeful, but there's a shred of me that is still hanging on to the possibility. So we'll really have to see how it plays out. But frankly, I think we could do with a period of less frequent regulation.
Yeah, we could do with a breather, at minimum a breather. But I think so. The pendulum swings back and forth. laws that were appropriate for one era or generation become suddenly very taxing and vexatious in a new era. People change, countries change, but I think liberty remains the same. Our founders had a great idea when they were giving us a republic if we could keep it. And I like to remind people that the Constitution actually guarantees the United States, the individual states, a Republican form of government. And so whatever we can do to continue that promise, to restore it, to make it more real, is what we should do. And so we have to thank the Gorsuch family for two consequential parts of our history, because they were a part of both of that. And I'm still going to keep hoping for the made-for-TV film. I think it could be juicy and good.
As am I, Stacey.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, especially from one of our favorite places, Independent Women's Forum Law Center. You also contribute at Young Voices at Jill C. Jacobson on X. Thank you so much for coming on. Happy Friday.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great night. And we have so much more for you coming up next week. I want to give you a little bit of a preview. We'll be covering the Republican National Convention live here on Stacy on the Right. It will be special coverage anchored by me, but we will have all of the best people. In fact, I can tell you now that I know for sure David Webb, host of the David Webb Show, will be anchoring live. He'll be providing live coverage from their comms desk to us. So when there are speakers, when there's anything happening on the floor of the convention, we'll bring that sound and audio to you, or David to report on it live from the convention during this time slot. So you don't want to miss it. If you're like me and you can't be one of those 50,000 people who will be in the convention space, then you will want to be here, locked in on SiriusXM for our special coverage. It's going to be amazing. In addition to David, we'll have other guests of very, very, very important renown joining me here on the show. So don't worry. If you can't make it to the RNC, we're going to bring it to you. Republican National Convention 2024 in an election year. It's going to be electric, and it'll be here for you on SiriusXM with me, Stacy Washington. God bless you. Have a fantastic night and weekend, and I'll be back with you on Monday.